The mic's at 100. I don't know why, but my computer keeps lowering my microphone volume. Hopefully I sound more audible now. Let's go. As long as there's no Max C, I have my chances of winning are good enough. They're having internet issues. Playing against Labyrinth is good, because I'm planning on playing that deck one of these days. Because Big Booba, that's really it. Oh god, do they not have any monsters? Oh god. Dun 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 dun. I'm not special summoning anything. On. Oh, yeah, that still counts. I forgot. Oh, I couldn't.
In my final hours, I wonder if I'll have any regrets. Things I could have done, places I could have been, sights I could have seen.
Board wipe, because it's just a board wipe. And it's like, okay, cool, it's a board wipe that I can pay a little more for. But then it ends up being crazy, especially because it's foretell, and you guys aren't used to playing with hidden information that's on the field. I can see that maybe being deceptively powerful, given this mechanic, if you're not, like, super familiar with it. So if that's true, then that means people overvalue Divide by Zero. Let me think the alternative now. If people
Why is it always the runic
value
players
Divide by Zero, because it's maybe a bit expensive for
with terrible
six,
internet
but
connection?
if that's anything meta value 1 or greater, that's a lot. And you're getting an extra card in addition to that. I think I like my logic here. I think because Doomscar is a card that people are a lot more equipped to evaluate, because Divide by Zero, I feel like there's like a lot to it, and I feel like Divide by Zero might be one of those cards where people read it at first, they're like, okay, this is like okay, but then the way the meta develops, people might realize, oh, this is actually just like good. Like that card we discussed in the previous video, I what was it? That like Saga, it was like the red Saga card that was like, it wasn't like flashy necessarily, but it was just like a lot of really good value for a single card.
Fable of the Mirror Breaker.
Yeah, Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Yeah, I feel like this is sort of giving me those vibes. Where like on the surface, this is kind of like, eh, but then like people realize, oh, this is actually really good. And I feel like when you get to newer cards and you're unfamiliar with like these lesson cards and things like that, I feel like it's easier to evaluate a board wipe and just think that, oh yeah, this seems crazy, and it might not be good, and it ends up like not being good because it's just kind of like whatever. So I'm gonna guess that. I think Doomscar was overrated and Divide by Zero was underrated. Final answer.
Okay, before I reveal it, this isn't for an extra point or anything, I'm just curious of your thoughts. What if I told you one of these cards was banned? Do you think that's possible?
Really? Well, I mean, messing with me. Yeah.
Could not be banned?
I'm not saying you could be messing with me, just asking.
I could be. I could be. It's kind of fun.
One of these was banned? I can't. Really?
Maybe.
Maybe.
You don't think so, huh? Your gut says no?
My gut's saying no, but like your game is just so different. I can maybe see I can't see them just banning them. Like surely not. There's so many board wipes in the game. I can't. If they banned a card, I feel like they would ban the Divide by Zero. Maybe.
All right.
Because I can see
ready?
that just being really annoying. I can see just like the bouncing and like everything with learning, especially if you have multiple copies of this card. I don't know. So yeah, sure. Enlighten me to which of these cards is banned, if any.
So, let's start with Doomscar.
Okay.
In previous season, the thing that you need to know the most is that while there are board wipes in basically every set, and 5 mana has been a very normal rate, if not slightly above rate for a board wipe, 4 being kind of the best board wipes are 4 mana, there had not been a 3 mana board wipe. And this, very much to many people, read as a 3 mana destroy all creatures board wipe.
Sure.
Which on the internet, in the year this came out, let's say 2021, read as aggro is unplayable. Creatures are banned. It's over. So Doomscar went on to be a very, very good card. It saw plenty of play, and there were other foretell cards in
I've
the
never
deck,
heard
so
of generators.
It was definitely the cat and mouse game of
They
I
look
foretell
pretty
this
cool.
card, and the opponent being like, oh god, what if it's a Doomscar? And yeah, that was a feel bad for aggro mages. But the hype on this card in previous season was like end of the world level, much like the card looks like. Like creatures are unplayable, and that was not the case. There were very good creature decks in the format throughout the entirety of Doomscar's legality. Doomscar fluctuated in play. Sometimes it was played a lot. I played it a lot because I'm a control mage, but there were plenty of decks that did not play Doomscar that could have. There were plenty of times that decks didn't play 4 Doomscars even though they could have. So I would say that
I'm taking
Doomscar
a
was
piss.
very over, and I think most people overrated.
Yes. Yes. Good card. I know.
Well,
I think the
look
card's
at
bad.
her.
Yep. Divide by Zero was a
For
card that
him?
I literally didn't see on anybody's top 10 list, which is really funny in hindsight, because Doomscar was like number 2 and number 1 on a ton of top 10 lists. It was like way up there. Everybody was very afraid of that card. I didn't even consider this card for standard play until I saw another content creator playing and tried to get 2 copies. The thing about Divide by Zero is
Interesting.
target spell its owner's hand.
Do they have Dimension Shifter or Max Seed? I'd rather get Max Seed, honestly.
Set them back on any spell they cast that was like 3 mana, any expensive spell. Get some kind of an upside from it by getting a lesson out of your sideboard. And the fact that it just didn't trigger its battlefield ability, because you could just return it all on the stack to the hand. Or if you tapped out something and they cast something, you could untap by 0 and set it back that way. So it wasn't like you had to worry about the timing of the the card. And the fact that it doesn't counter the spell, it returns the spell, this minor little warning on the card meant that even if you played an uncounterable card like Tome of the Cosmos Circuit, a big monster that said can't be countered on it.
Okay then. Holy Mother of Jesus. That was infuriating.
So brutal. It was absolutely brutal. People looked at lessons and thought it would be a limited or like draft, right, for sealed, because these are just bad rates. You know, if you look at environmental sciences on its own, it's a bad rate. If you look at mascot exhibition on its own, you wouldn't just play that card in a deck. It's too expensive.
But if it's free,
if it's free, you know, you get that flexibility of one or the other. Now the state of the game you're in, yep, it turns out to be really good. And were either of these banned? Yes, Divide by Zero got banned.
that's insane.
It's
Wow.
one of, I still think it's one of the most controversial bans, but Divide by Zero got banned from the standard format for just being too good, I guess. It's still kind of wild and unclear, but
You guys don't really ban
yeah.
stuff in standard very often. Because usually
they
it's
avoid it. They try to avoid it. They really do. And there was a blue-red, like, control-ish, tempo-ish deck at the time that was very powerful in the meta, and they decided that Divide by Zero was the card from it that really had to be slowed down. They took another card from it as well that I might show you someday, so we're not going to talk about that.
Sure.
But Divide by Zero is one of the more interesting cards to ever be banned, for sure, and a card that nobody had that I saw in a top 10 list that nobody talked about in previous season, that absolutely nobody saw coming. So,
It's so fascinating.
yep, you got the first one right. How do you feel? You're
good.
basically a god among Magic players right
Feel
now.
good. I'm probably already doing better than Raren, so that's good.
I'm just gonna keep that to myself. All right, next pair.
All right, what do we got? Tybalt's the Fiend Blooded. I like how he's like coming out of the frame. It's really cool. 2 red, like this guy. The Planeswalker. It is a 2 loyalty Planeswalker. +1, draw a card, then discard a card at random. -4, which means it will take 3 turns to actually do this. Tybalt the Fiend Blooded deals damage equal to the number of cards in target player's hand to that player. This damage equals the number of cards in target player's hand to that player. So, I'm assuming it's however many. So, I have 6 cards, I use the -4, then I take 6 damage, correct?
I mean, you would target the opponent.
Yeah,
So,
Sure.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I should have clarified that. But it's cool.
You have a weird idea of what to do with this card already.
Damn.
I like where this is going.
Well,
Keep
I was
evaluating.
clarifying
That's a
it's
really
the
good
owner's
spell.
hand is the damage. It's not like I target my hand and then the opponent takes the damage. That's what I was clarifying. I don't know why.
Yeah,
the way
yeah,
it's
that's-
worded. Anyway, -6, gain control of all end of turn. Untap them, they gain haste until end of turn. That's so cute. You guys have to get everything haste to me. Anyway.
Oh my god.
Nexus of Fate. That's a really cool name for the card. I love Magic art. I will say, like, even though I'm like a Yu-Gi-Oh player, Magic art is just really awesome a lot of the time. This is a
Thank
5,
you. We'll take it.
5 and 2 blue. This is expensive. It's an instant though. Take an extra turn after that one. You guys have extra. How many extra turn effects do you guys have? Take an extra turn after this one. If Nexus of Fate would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal Nexus of Fate, then shuffle it into its owner's library instead. That does not sound right. That does not sound right. Okay. You can also play 4 of this too. Something I don't know if you would actually play 4 of it, but
In tournament Magic, yes.
yes. Okay. So, God, see, this feels like bait. This just feels like such bait.
What are you talking about?
I feel like we specifically picked these because it's like Nexus seems like the broken card in some capacity, and then like Tybalt just seems like unassuming. And so I feel like the natural instinct is to say Nexus of Fate was overrated.
All right.
Was
I don't.
But that would assume that
I'm not
Tybalt was
winning this.
broken. And like, I'm not seeing it like on face value because unless there's, I guess Tybalt being only 2 mana is like maybe useful in some capacity. I like that you discard a card at random unless the deck you're trying to play has like these effects that trigger when things are either discarded or sent to the graveyard or whatever. That's like the only reason I can see that being good, because if it goes draw a card, discard a card, I feel different. The fact that it's random, I feel like makes this card
Yep,
infinitely
at
worse.
least 4 negates to deal
And
with.
like, you're telling me this thing's gonna survive for
Make that 5.
plus turns to use like its -4 or its
Guaranteed
-6,
5.
I don't know.
4
That seems
negates,
like
2 destructions.
I'll steal from rare. That sounds like this.
Or 3
But, like,
negates,
it seems too
1
obvious.
destruction,
Like,
1
We've
destruction
only done a
negate.
couple of these videos together, but I feel like you're already like setting up the mind games for this. I guess okay.
A lot of credit.
Let's think about Nexus. So Nexus is 7 to do this effect. I know Magic has, like we saw in the last video, you guys have effects that give you extra turns. I don't know, similar to the board play, I don't know what the base rate is for taking an extra turn in this game. So I don't know if 7 is where it is, I don't know if it's like 5, I don't know if it's 10, I have no idea. But all this does is give you an extra turn. It does shuffle itself back into the deck, so if there are like some gimmicky ways to like get it back, even though you can play
That's 1 destruction.
anyway. If there's ways to like continuously do this, maybe there's something there. Just because of the context of the game, this is what's messing with me. Because like Nexus of Fate clearly seems like the better card, but that would assume to me, or that tells me that people did not think this was good. And like, maybe I'm just Yu-Gi-Oh brain, but getting extra turns seems nuts. So, if I have to assume Nexus of Fate is the good card here, I would have to assume people thought Nexus of Fate was bad on announcing it. Which means I'd also have to assume Tibble was overvalued on release and ended up being garbage. Maybe not garbage, because the white board wipe, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad.
It's just about the hype relative to how
correct.
much it actually did.
Correct. You're wrecking my brain. This is messed up. This is messed up. I think I have to go with my gut, and I think I would rather be wrong here, just because I don't know Magic as a game that well. I would love for you to tell me that Tibble is like just the craziest card ever printed. So I'm going to assume that Nexus was underrated and became like the best card ever in some capacity, and then Tibble was overrated and ended up not being that good. There has to be something I'm missing with Tibble, because this does not seem particularly good. So, play.
The case with
And of
Tibble
course, there's an
is that
Xe.
this was the first ever 2-mana Planeswalker.
Oh,
First
really?
time that they've ever put a Planeswalker out at just 2 mana.
What's like
And,
the base rate for one?
well, there were some good 3-mana ones, but they're very hard to come by. 4 and 5 mana, very normal for a Planeswalker.
Okay.
And because the loyalty tends to stack up, and as the opponent is in the process of developing a board, the thing that kind of checked Planeswalkers, especially back then when it was hard to use spells to remove them, the thing that checked them was attacking them with creatures. So if you get a Planeswalker down early and start using its plus abilities early before the opponent even has any creatures, it becomes very hard for the opponent to eventually reach the Planeswalker. They use removal spells, they use blockers, and they defend the Planeswalker until they get their ultimate, which, in this case, was a very difficult one, as people would say, for them to play around. Because if they hold back, the -4 domes them and hits them in the head. And if they play out their creatures, the -6 steals all the creatures and then beats them to death with them. So either way, it was going to be very hard to play around a Tibble that came down on turn 2 and started plussing right away. And when people thought about that play pattern, they got really excited because they seen a 2-mana Planeswalker before. And as it would turn out, once or twice seeing Tibble in play, everybody realized that just wasn't very good. That discarding around was terrible. And Tibble was very overrated in previous seasons. Nexus of Fate, it's not that nobody saw it. There were some people sounding a few alarm bells, but there were some interesting things about Nexus of Fate.
We just did a video where you talked about all the different ways that they release Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Nexus of Fate was a new one for Magic at the time. If you see down there, it says it was a buy-a-box promo, right?
Okay.
In M19. This meant this wasn't in booster packs. You could not open this in a booster pack. You had to buy a box, and you would get a Nexus of Fate little single with it.
Yu-Gi-Oh's never done anything like that for contests.
Right. And there was obviously Nexus of Fate had a big impact on how this promotion was treated in the future. Because first there were people being like, well, they didn't evaluate it as part of the set. Because it was kind of just tacked on, right?
Sure.
It was also insanely expensive. For an extra turn, Time Warp was pretty damn amazing at 5 mana. But other cards like Part the Water Veil that followed it and Walk the Aeons didn't break the formats they were in. They were good, but not broken cards at 6 mana. This is 7 mana. It had also been a little while since an extra turn spell had appeared in Standard, and I think people looked at the cost and the fact that Wizards felt that they could just make it a buy-a-box promo, which many people thought of as that must mean that it's not that much of a chase rare, because it would be egregious, right?
Oh,
to put a must-have card as the buy-a-box promo.
Sure.
They took this as not a real part of the set, and it did take a while. Nexus of Fate didn't come out of the gate swinging, but within a year of release, it did rise to prominence as one of the best decks in the format. It did win a Mythic Championship in decks that were designed to ramp up the mana and cast it over and over again while using effects that kind of thinned their deck down to just a handful of Nexus of Fates left in the library. This is one of the only cards in Magic history to be banned in Best of One, because people would play it in decks with no win cons and just empty their deck except for Nexus of Fate and just cast it over and over until they're fucking conceded. Because there's no time limit in Best of One. So it got banned. So, yep.
Okay. It's funny, like, the perception of the card, because it was a buy-a-box promo, that it was bad. I think that's just, like, a fun element of people evaluating it. Like, oh, surely they wouldn't just give us, like, one of the best cards that was, like, in this set as a buy-a-box promo.
Yeah, and totally transparent, there were people who said this card would be very good, but the community as a whole, I think, I feel strongly, having been there, I feel like the community underrated it quite a bit.
I see.
And it very much had, I think if they went back and looked at M19 objectively, it's probably the best card in the set, and several people didn't even have it on their top 10.
Fascinating. I guess that makes sense, though, because if you said the base rate for, like, a turn skip is around 5, then, like, sure, you have to have, like, the right deck to really take advantage of this, I feel like. So I can see this being, especially if you guys are used to extra turn stuff. Like, it just took so much practice. No.
Yep. Speaking of cracking it.
Okay. Got here. Umezawa's Jite. It is a 2-mana legendary artifact equipment. Whenever an equipped creature deals combat damage, put 2 charge counters on Umezawa's Jite. Remove a charge counter from this, choose one. Either equipped creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, or target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. You gain life. It's an equipped cost. Okay. Let me ask this. I don't know how much this matters or not, but are you allowed to remove multiple counters on this card, like, in the same turn? Or can you only do that once?
You can remove as many counters as you have whenever you like.
Got it. Okay. Just wanted to clarify. I wasn't sure because it didn't say you could only do one certain thing. I guess that would... Alright, and then the comparable card here, potentially. Assassin's Tree. A black and a green. This is an instant. Destroy target permanent and opponent.
Alright, yeah, I should have targeted this spell, I suppose.
Basic land card. Put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle their library. That's pretty good, considering it doesn't really have... I know a lot of holy magic I've seen usually has, like, chips attached to it. It's like, kill something that has, like, 2 or less power. This or that. So this just destroys... Oh, also... Yeah, permanent. Nothing. Okay, so this can actually... of giving your opponent a land, letting them get ahead on the meta. Okay, where do I start? I feel like the GTA is very hard for Wait, like Yu-Gi-Oh has spells for the most part. I want to say they're all bad. So, I think for Magic, but maybe that's I'm not sure. So, it's Yu-Gi-Oh combat. So you need to spend 2 mana to play this, and then you need to also spend 2 mana to play this. So you either have to try to just think of some example. Play this on like play a creature on turn 1, play this on turn 2. Or you can actually equip this thing in the counter. Your opponent can still block it. Agency. But if you're dealing combat damage, damaging anything, right? Whether it's a creature or an opponent. Right?
Yep.
Okay, so any damage gives you the counters. And then it's now here's a question. If a creature dies in combat. So let me say I attack with you block, and you're blocking with my attack. Does the GTA still get the counters in that chain?
The GTA would get the counter as long as your creature did some damage to the other creature.
So even if my creature dies, it still gets the counters.
As a result of the damage from the opposing creature, as long as your creature also damaged the opposing creature,
Got it.
it's still
Got it. And then if the creature dies, the DJ still retains the counters.
Yes. The counters are on the day, not on the creature.
Got it.
It's full combo, nothing special left to see here.
The equip spells attack.
Nothing I can do either.
Dies. Where in Magic, like someone else can pick it back up. Always how I attack. Which is kind of interesting. So in that case, over the course of the game, you can keep equipping this truth things. Keep building up charge counters. And then you can spend all the charge counters to try to get like a huge hit in something. Some stupid thing. You have to spend 2 mana to bypass that. This is a really hard card to evaluate for me. Assassin's Trophy is a bit more straightforward. And it seems good. It seems pretty decent. And now, the weird thing is, though, you're letting your opponent ramp by a land, and I'm not sure, like, how much people in Magic value that. Because obviously, if they get ahead on mana, that means they have more resources to play more cards. And that's not necessarily a good thing for you, so play this card. But maybe you like the flexibility that you can destroy anything with this, and that's like okay. I need to think of this in the context of our game, right? I need to think about, on paper, would someone look at this card and think that this is crazy? And then maybe it wasn't as crazy as it was later on. I don't think you can look at Assassin's Trophy seems like a good card. This seems like a good card. At least at face value. Do I think people overhype this versus underhype this? I can see people underhyping it because maybe they don't like the fact that their opponent gets a land. And then it ends up being really good as a result of that, because like that maybe people are like, oh, the length doesn't matter because I'd rather have the flexibility. That's really interesting. Conversely, they can overhype Assassin's Trophy, not care about the fact that they give their opponent a land, and then maybe it's just not as good as people thought it was. I think it really just boils down to how much people value giving their opponent a little extra ramping at the end of it all.
It is curious what you think of that as somebody who just plays everything.
Because everything's
for
free! Everything's free! It's just gonna be the meme between us at this point. Everything's free. I feel like I really have to base my decision on Assassin's Trophy, because I feel like it's really too difficult for me to evaluate the Jite.
You don't. You're not even sure if it's good. Not even sure if it's bad.
I think there's so much context surrounding this card, and just because the game is so fundamentally different than what I'm used to, I think it's really tough for me to like determine whether this card is good or not. So I actually think I'm going to put all my stock into the Assassin's Trophy, hope that gets me there. It keeps my perfect record so far. I think people thought that Assassin's Trophy was going to be bad because it gives your opponent a land. So it was underrated. And then people realized that it didn't matter because you'd rather just have something that can pop anything if you are in these two colors. And that just is a card your deck can play. It's like the most flexible removal. It only costs 2, which seems really cheap. It's at instant speed. But I really think the big hang-up here is giving your opponent a land may have just seemed really bad. But like, if your opponent doesn't have anything to do with that mana, then that doesn't matter. So, if the game progresses to a point where you're in like more simplified game state, then you can give it doesn't. There's a point where the lands are superfluous, right? Like the land just becomes irrelevant, and this card is just destroy something your opponent has. But does that mean people overrate it? God, this is hard. Oh my god, why are you doing this to me, CJ?
Because it's fun and
I guess. I'm stick with my gut. I think people underrated it because of the fact it gave your opponent a land. And then, which means I think people overrated Umezawa's Jite as a result. And I'm very curious to learn where this card falls in Magic's history period. Because I'm sure there's like a whole long story you have prepared for this card, and I thoroughly am looking forward to seeing this. So I think Assassin's Trophy was underrated, Jite was overrated. Final answer.
Umezawa's Jite has a lot of text on it.
It does.
And that probably does influence a lot of its legacy. Umezawa's Jite came out after one of the more busted sets of all time in a set called Betrayers of Kamigawa. And the Kamigawa block in general was treated by Magic players with a certain amount of malaise, because the Mirrodin block before it was absolutely insanely busted and resulted in a ton of banned cards. The power level was too high. Kamigawa was the chill that came afterwards.
Okay.
So, when the second Kamigawa set came out, and this was one of the rares, people were not excited about Umezawa's Jite. And man, once they played with it, this card took over games. It just absolutely took over games so fast. Because the moment something had a few charge counters with this thing, well, for one thing, every creature became a threat, because any creature with a power on it could make a charge counter. And then every creature after it almost always won in combat. This card was so monumental in Standard that at the time the Legend rule was written in such a way that whoever played a legendary artifact like Umezawa's Jite is, if the opponent also played one, there couldn't be, the paradox, and they would both die. That was the rule at the time. So people actually ran, because there wasn't artifact removal in certain colors, people actually ran 4 copies of this card just to play to destroy the opponent's copy.
That's so funny. Oh
yes.
My God.
Yes. So Umezawa's Jite was the underrated card, as people really didn't realize how absolutely defining it would be. They weren't impressed with it on first glance. Assassin's Trophy was the overrated card, and you circled so many things correctly, but you have more in common with Magic players than you think. Because Magic players looked at this and was like, oh my god. It really was unheard of. 2 mana, instant speed, destroy anything. Almost all removal for the modern age of Magic had a drawback or a restriction, and mostly it was restriction. Doper the Throat can destroy any creature but not an artifact creature. Terror can destroy any creature but not a black creature. Like, there were usually limiting factors on 2 mana removal spells. But Assassin's Trophy was there saying anything. Want to hit a land? We'll hit a land. Want to hit an enchantment? We'll hit an enchantment. And people immediately saw that and were like, oh my god, nothing is safe. Nothing. And they disregarded the fact that they're giving up. And reeling was often a huge problem for Assassin's Trophy, and the issue with running like 4 copies. People quickly realized you do not want to cast Assassin's Trophy in the first 3 turns of the game. You're going to ramp your opponent out so significantly ahead of you, and they still have cards in hand, so they're going to take advantage of it. And so the card was basically unplayable if you drew it early. Unplayable if you drew it early. So running 4 copies didn't make sense. Assassin's Trophy can go on like a 1 or 2 of in a number of decks. It's currently legal in standard. Most decks that could play it, not play it. But if they do, it's like 1 copy.
I think GTA is really interesting too because Yu-Gi-Oh! Which is like more like Magic in a lot of ways, is the amount of like focus on like clear combat. I feel like by especially modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Standards is almost non-existent. Like there's just so much hard control in Yu-Gi-Oh! That combat almost gets trivialized so many times where it's like you never have to worry about, you know, just something like the stats really don't matter all the time. We talked about that some of my places. So it's interesting like seeing a card like this and it's like, if this existed in Yu-Gi-Oh! This would just like be unplayable. But like for Magic, this is like one of the craziest cards ever for the time. That's like just really fascinating. That's cool. I get it though too, like it makes sense when you put it in context.
It's still a very good commander card too. Like decks that use equipment a lot, I absolutely love it.
I love that they played destroying other copies of it. That's so cool.
They had to change that rule because of this card specifically because it's colorless. Every deck could play it.
That's amazing. That's so fun. There was something that happened similarly where there was a card that I don't remember if I showed you the spells at all, but there's a card that can give you a opponent a real spell, and then because it's a card that can activate because it had a requirement on activating it, you weren't allowed to activate it. So people would play the card in their deck, counter their opponent, did that to them so they could then activate the card. Very technology. Well, yeah, it was bad. It was
Is he
awful.
talking about Mystic Mine?
4 cards. These guys are Savage Knuckleblade. In green, a blue, and a red. A tri-type. He's an ogre warrior. Pretty vicious. 2 in green. Savage Knuckleblade. +2/+2. And the turn. Activates this ability once per turn. Okay, so you can't just like keep them. Because if I recall, there's like mana. You can theoretically activate as much as you want to consume the mana, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Unless it says activate. Alright, 2 in a blue. Turn Savage Knuckleblade to his hand. Okay,
Nice.
wanted to dodge something. And then for a red, for a red, Savage Knuckleblade haste until then. That's pretty cool. It like offsets the back to the turn. Right back to it. Alright. And then Desecration. That's a card. 2 and 2 black. Even. I would hope so. Flying. Combat. Any opponent is sacrificed with if it does half the desecration for a +1/+1 power. That seems I'm trying to think about how now let me ask you this. If you play Desecration and go to your combat step, push your opponent to sacrifice. Oh no, they don't have to. They wouldn't have to because you can't. They have the option. Right. I think you should.
They're gonna be like, I don't think I can.
Hey, we don't have easy sickness in our game. Okay, sorry. Alright, that's fine. So play this on 4. Does nothing. Turn 5 comes around. Go to combat, you've got some other stuff. And now they have the option to sacrifice half of this, but then that makes the desecration bigger. And if your opponent doesn't have anything to sacrifice, then this thing can just get in. It doesn't fly, so it can't just like dodge a lot of things.
I'll also just make sure we're clear. It's at the beginning of each combat, so if the opponent wanted to sack something too, so it couldn't block, they could do that too.
Oh, okay.
I completely forgot about the banish effect.
It's also weird too, how we walk our game, so it's a little bit evaluate that. Let me go back to the number. So you play this on 3, assuming you have all 3 color types. Which isn't like
this also came out in a set called Concept Art Here that was built around these 3 color type kind of clans. So at this point in Standard, it was very doable.
Okay. Appreciate the clarity there. This is just like a guy. It's just a guy. Like it's a guy. It's a 3-mana 4/4, which is like pretty. Like the stats are good for the cost, but I think because it's like 3 types, it's probably fine that you can go with that. But like the issue I see with this card is that played on 3, maybe your opponent doesn't really have anything, and then next turn you get all your mana back, so now you have the ability to like protect it or pump it or whatever. And then, like, you're spending your whole turn throwing into nothing, like, instead of, like, developing more of the board. And, like, how much mana do one spend on this, like, 4/4? And, like, yes, he can become a 6/6 if you have enough mana for that. But now that I'm thinking this, I'm thinking if I was evaluating this card the first time I saw it, like, okay, when I think this card is not good and this card ended up being crazy, or with my severely inferior brain, is this card like nuts by magic ways? Like, I'm good. Going back to Desecration. I feel like Desecration is something where people are like, oh, this card is
Need
crazy.
more hand traps.
Making the opponent sacrifice